In my mind, and this is just from the filmmaker's point of view, of course it's up to each member of the audience to make of it what they will, but that they both are very human. I mean, they recognise the humanity in each other. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but it's interesting to me that if you had to ask one of the things, and Idris may have a different answer, what is one of the things that drives the Jinn? I think he really wants to know what it feels like to be human. And in many ways, I think that's the same thing with Alethea. She basically experiences the world through other people's stories, and but eventually becomes deeply immersed in her own story. So that's my sort of answer for that.
I think that the Jinn sort of really recognizes an equilibrium. Right, this is a man that sort of understands story, narrative, understands how engaging and how to use language to bring someone in, and then find someone that isn't easy to manipulate. And, you know, that intrigue draws him even closer, because it's beyond, you know, now, okay, I can manipulate you with my words, perhaps with my gifts, to make you release me, but there's something more that I think he senses in Alethea, and then finds this sort of comfort, you know, in the sense that, well, I've met my match, you know, and I think within that there's a real exploration of something he hasn't felt before, which we could call love, we could call some sort of desire, but it turns into something very powerful between the two of them, and something, again, like he hasn't felt before. So I think that's part of what draws the Jinn in, and what he sees, which is so unique about Alethea. And for him, I guess the doorway into, you know, the human experience, it's being tantalized and opened and shut by Alethea to come on in, well, let's see what you've got. It's really interesting when, you know, Tilda and I discovering this, and with George, and we sat around a table for a long time telling each other stories, and that was part of the journey of finding these characters. Anyway, that's a different answer altogether, but yeah.
Well, she's an extraordinary person in that, you know, when confronted by Jinn, who's proposing to her to grant 3 wishes, she says she doesn't have any. I mean, that's a poser, not just for the Jinn, who's never met anyone like that before, but I think for us, I mean, it's quite a thing to think about. Someone who really doesn't want anything. And I think when Idris so rightly talks about equilibrium, what that speaks to is that they are both in a way, they're both, it's not that they're solitary, but they're both unsocialized in a way. They're both in their own, just as he's been in a bottle for 3,000 years, she's been in a sort of bottle as well, of her own making. And they come together, in my view, in a very healthy relationship where people kind of show each other their solitudes. They show each other even their loneliness, and they go, okay, well, there's only so much I can do about that. I can't really mess with it. That's yours, and I'll show you mine, and let's just sort of keep each other company in this acknowledgement that is sort of what a human is because we're all on our own path, and we keep each other company, and if we're lucky, we find wonderful people to keep each other company, and that's what they discover. And I would call it love, but it's actually, as you correctly say, it's so beyond any kind of, the romantic idea of love that we've been sold for so long is that people become one. And these two never become one. They come together, they witness each other, and they support each other, and well, I'm not going to spoil, but, you know, they stay apart, as it were. Yeah, I'm not going to say what happens, but they don't merge, they don't lose themselves in each other, and that's really sophisticated and incredibly mature, because the other thing about them is that they weren't born yesterday. I mean, she hasn't lived 3,000 years, but almost. But they've lived long lives, and they have things they've survived, both of them. They're not fresh young beings who are ready to merge with another. And anyway, so I think it's actually very relatable. I think it's not, you don't have to be a Jinn to feel this way about you know, making some kind of alliance with someone.
Well, one of the opportunities that I was drawn to when we were making this film, on the one hand, it's two people in a room, a relatively small room, and yet we fly off into both of their imaginations and the collective imaginations of us as humankind, you know, looking at the various cultures. And that was very intriguing, bouncing between the two. And of course, you know, as Alethea announces at the beginning of the story, it's a fairy tale, and so it's an exercise in imagination. And I don't know, you know, I'm always reluctant to impose my personal meanings on the stories, but it's certainly a story, or one of the notions of the story is to ask the question, what is real and what is not? And that becomes we play when we go to the cinema, particularly the cinema, and we kind of surrender ourselves into whatever world is created on the screen. And as we know, even if it's a documentary, it's not the real world. So that's exactly what's going on, particularly in Alethea's experience, is what the audiences go through, and it's what I think is why we're attracted to stories.
Yeah, I think, you know, the decision about what kind of character the Jinn is sort of written and baked into the literature, the original story, and essentially what became the script. So those choices were, you know, sort of made for me, if you like. But what was our doing was, you know, what he looked like, what he sounded like, and you know, George was really encouraging of not doing any sort of impersonations or any sort of form that we may have seen a Jinn or genie, whatever you want to call it, before. It's really important that even down to how, you know, what he looked like. You know, we went through a few stages of what he might look like, different noses, different ears, you know, stuff like that. And George kept sort of going, I'm not sure. I think we should just peel it back, because what George wanted, and what I guess we all sort of ended up encouraging, was ourselves, you know, this sort of inside out performance, this thing that's coming from Idris, from Tilda, into this story, which is already really well constructed. So one of the big key decisions for us is what he sounded like. You know, it's 3,000 years of longing, 3,000 years of language. And for us, that was like, I mean, for me, it was a huge challenge, but it was also one of the most satisfying things I've ever done in my career. You know, George, myself, and Tilda sort of figuring out what he sounds like, and basically creating a language. Working with this wonderful woman, Susan, who's a dialect person, when we sort of just looked at the landscape of the years and the languages that were also a part of the film, and figuring out what would he sound like, what would that be, and that was part of the discovery, you know. I mean, it was super satisfying for us to sit there and start to understand a language that we actually created. I'd never forget that. We were like, oh my God, that's Jimbis. Wow, we just created that, that's Jimbis. And then, yeah, you know, obviously this beautiful story, this character that wants something and longed for a long time, that really sort of kind of steered where I ended up playing him.
The idea that the so-called supernatural character is the one with all the doubts, and the human character is actually much clearer and simpler and more sort of set, as it were. That was something that I think George talked about right from the offset. This was one way to disrupt all the stereotypes. Yeah.
For me, sitting here now, it's a kind of strange, cathartic experience for me, simply because I got to know Tilda and Idris. We worked together, and characters evolve in the process of the work, of course. All those millions of discussions, millions, but many discussions,
pretty much.
but
Gazillions.
endless discussions, thinking, basically taking who they are with all their skills and talents and life experience, and somehow meshing them into these characters, which after the shoot, I spend a good part of a year with every day, and these characters up there, they're no longer the two actors here, they are the characters for me. I've long forgotten the moments of the shoot. I'd long forgotten which take we used, and all those sort of things that you're aware of when you're making the film technically. And they actually became the characters for me. I kept on thinking of them as Alethea and the Jinn. And now, today, this very day, I meet them again. There's Idris, and I'm thinking, that's not Idris. That's not the real Idris. The real Idris is the Jinn. And with Tilda, exactly the same. It's a really weird feeling, and I've never quite had that before. It's really interesting. So I'm sitting here now, listening to you two deconstruct this.
We were there as well.
Yeah, I know.
We were present. I mean, it must be strange.
During the shoot?
We were in Australia shooting, yes.
Yeah, no, you were there. No. Look, on the set, it's a kind of a blend between the two.
Yeah.
You're sort of saying, you're sort of saying, oh, maybe Idris could do this, or Tilda could do that, and you're still seeing them, because they're just small moments in between takes. There's small fragments of time that you're grabbing, and hopefully they fit together elegantly. But as the film comes together, then there's that transformation, which it was really striking on this film. And something happened that I only see them as characters. So now I'm going through a kind of a debriefing, sort of decompression here in this very moment. So it's really interesting to me.